GM everyone, and welcome to Smart Contact, an interview series with the world's most influential and impactful Web3 leaders. This podcast is produced by Web3 Harbour and is supported by Circle. Like and subscribe for more Smart Contacts.
Welcome to another episode of Smart Contact, produced by Web3 Harbour and supported by Circle, our series sponsor. I'm Kevin Kang, co-founder of Reap, and I am your host today. It is a pleasure to be part of Smart Contact today and bring meaningful conversation to the Web3 ecosystem. We are recording today's Smart Contact with Lu Yin of Solana. Having come from traditional finance before transitioning over to Web3, he brings a wealth of knowledge to his current role in leading the Solana Foundation's efforts in APAC. Today, we'll be exploring how Solana is preparing for institutional readiness through initiatives like Solana Accelerate and Fire Dancer, solving the last mile of payments, and the rise of automation and agentic payments. We'll also be exploring why stablecoin native payments and infrastructure companies like Reap want to build on Solana and how adoption is doing. We'll also look ahead to Hong Kong in 2030 and what the line between TradFi and Web3 will look like. Thank you for joining our conversation today. Maybe just to start off, Lu, love for you to give a brief introduction about yourself and Solana.
Thank you, Kevin, for hosting me. My name is Lu, and I'm with Solana Foundation. I look after the APAC efforts here. So kind of my background is a mix of traditional finance and technology. So I was 10 years on Wall Street doing investment banking and private equity. And then after that, I was in the Bay Area since 2010. So I really try to bridge the two cultures. Oftentimes there's a tension or a culture shock between Wall Street and Silicon Valley. And you can imagine how difficult it is also for Web3 people as well. But with that said, being in Hong Kong this week, just been a really great experience. Consensus has been great. Meeting a lot of financial institutional players who want to do more on Solana in this space, and also meeting more and more developers as well.
Cool. Very great to have you here. I think you and I both share that experience going from the TradFi world into technology and now even more into Web3. Some people see those as polar extremes. What have you found in terms of people who move in this particular direction that is really important and are important characteristics for people to kind of make that transition?
That's a good question. I think for me, it's just the curiosity, right? I think across each of those transitions in terms of technology, it takes people who are willing to be on the frontier of things, right? People who are willing to kind of operate within an uncertain environment and be okay with that. And for people who are willing to kind of take no, and face kind of these obstacles on a daily basis. If you have that resiliency and you obviously have to have the right direction, then the ability to kind of actually create value and build these type of businesses, build these services, I think is quite meaningful.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that's kind of what drew me here as well. Maybe we can talk a little bit more specifically about Solana. What is it about Solana's ecosystem and the developer community that is drawing people with these kind of backgrounds here? And you guys have a very huge presence at Consensus in HK this week. And you guys have a lot of people who are building for institutional readiness. So can you tell me a little bit about what Solana specifically brings out of these kind of people?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a couple of things. Number one is fundamentally the technology has to work very well, right? Obviously, given the founders' backgrounds coming from telecom side, they are very low-level engineers. And their focus is always to do two things. Make sure that the chain is fast and the chain is cheap. When you have that kind of locked in, then all the applications, all the middleware, all the developers have the opportunity to actually build the products on top of that. Obviously, we're not done. We're continuously improving upon our technology. But with that said, when you have the foundation layer, and then you're able to have a couple of successes within the ecosystem, then there's a compounding effect where one project invites some of their friends to build on top of Solana, and then the snowball effect kind of takes over. And we're kind of seeing the same thing in the traditional finance side, right? Once Visa decided to leverage Solana as a technology, once BlackRock, Franklin Templeton, now JP Morgan, I think it just kind of opens up the channel for different types of players and stakeholders to participate within the Solana ecosystem.
So it sounds like you guys are moving towards this idea of an internet capital market concept, which I think we're all very excited about. If you think about some of those pieces that you mentioned in terms of building a capital market, historically, traditionally, financial hubs such as Hong Kong has historically been very important in the traditional capital market sense. Can you talk a little bit about how hubs like Hong Kong can now play a role in the internet capital market that you guys are building? And what does that mean to Solana?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Hong Kong is a great fit for kind of what we're trying to do with internet capital markets. At a high level, what we believe is that there are 5.5 billion people in the world that have access to the internet through their cell phones or through their laptops. Through this technology, we believe that they should have the ability to access payment services, financial services, investment services, and we believe that they should be able to access the global liquidity as well. Obviously, there's compliance, security. We take that very, very seriously. But I think opening up this offering of different product suites and services is something that we're very keen on. Now, coming back to Hong Kong specifically, I really think Hong Kong has it all. Right, and no matter how we see the future of finance, you will always need custodians. You will always need some type of brokers. You will always need people who can issue, who can help provide other third-party services, legal, accounting, and all of those services are very much embedded in kind of the DNA of Hong Kong. And so, as this industry matures in the next couple of years and decades, I think Hong Kong will be a very important place, and they'll have to play a very important role to push this industry forward.
That being said, I think being a traditional capital markets hub does not necessarily equate to being an internet capital market hub. There are still certain things that I think, whether it's Hong Kong or other places, we'll still have to do to get there. What, in your view, are those ingredients and pieces that still needs to be developed for Hong Kong or wherever else to step into that internet capital market stage?
I think internet capital markets are a long-term vision. I mean, both of us have worked in traditional finance, as you mentioned, and we understand that within these large financial institutions, stability, security is top priority. And given that this is still blockchain, still a very new technology, it will take time for regulators, right, for the central banks, for the commercial banks, for the wholesale banks to all kind of align in terms of the framework, not just framework for issuing, framework for custodying, framework for their own internal capital ratios, right? So these are things that are still being figured out. So I do think it will take more time than obviously some of us had hoped. But I do think given kind of where Hong Kong sits, again, it has all the right pieces. And the fact that I do think the regulators have done a really good job in terms of aligning the different stakeholders across different projects and to kind of push them in the right direction.
How do you think Solana plays a role in that, specifically around the ecosystem or the technology, or even working with players such as Reap to get that transition across? Yeah,
I think we typically work at it from three levels. The first one, as I mentioned in the very beginning, is the technology side. Right. Our team spent a lot of time making sure that we're making constant improvements, hearing the needs of the ecosystem, building out new features, tools, and also working with our ecosystem partners to build out what we feel like tools of today and the tools that will meet the needs of the future. Some of the things you mentioned, kind of AI tooling, better middleware, better payments APIs, those are all the things kind of on the roadmap. In addition to that, we also need to meet the needs of the regulators. So permission environments, permission transactions, off-chain transactions, those are all the things that we're considering as well. And some of the features we are going to launch very soon.
That definitely resonates a lot with us here at Reap. I think stability and kind of compliance with regulation is paramount, especially as we're thinking building new technology with players such as Solana. The way that we frame it is that everything that we want to do has to eventually get to scale, right? In order to rival the traditional capital markets, everything has to kind of feed into the traditional scale of things, and any lost, downtime equates to lost revenue. So stability is paramount for us. In that sense, like, how do you think, having a real value settlement and moving assets on chain, how critical is it to have a regulated one-to-one backed anchor as a foundational liquidity layer?
I think it's hard to say. Taking a step back, I think what the beauty of this technology is about its optionality, right? And I think that there is no one right solution. I do think that every country, every enterprise themselves have to make their own decisions and trade-offs in terms of how they adopt this technology. Historically speaking, just speaking on the more, I'll say, financial institution side, what I've seen that over the past couple of years is within a financial institution, they're just, once they make a decision to kind of move into this space, to typically go through three phases, right? They'll go through a phase where they only run permission environments internally as kind of a testing environment. They'll run it for anywhere between a year or two. And then they realize that within this permission environment, it's very difficult to get other players to join. So then they move on to, for example, Ethereum L1. They believe that it's decentralized ecosystem, it's open, and that they're definitely taking a leap of faith as well. But once they kind of get onto Ethereum L1, obviously a lot of challenges come in terms of speed and fees. And then they move into the search for high performance blockchains. And that's kind of where Solana really stands out. And so the point is just that for every individual financial institution or regulators, I feel like they're all going to have to make that transition. They have to learn that process themselves. Because if you think about a large business, they have IT security teams internally, they have compliance teams internally, they have their business units, they have their horizontal consulting units. And for all of them to kind of align to say, hey, we're going to go straight into a public environment, we'll have to run a lot of processes and a lot of tests before that happens. So yes, I do think having that environment with one-to-one back, maybe a little bit permissioned, is something that I think is more palatable for the financial institutions today.
So we're pretty lucky in the sense that, we've been working with you guys pretty much from day one on our side. Is there any advice that you would give to other, payment industry players, financial services industry players on how to get there faster, right? Do you think this is the defined way, which is you just work internally in a provision environment and then eventually upgrade and start working with Solana? Like, is that how you envision the future?
No, I think different verticals, I think you have different regulations and people can start from different places. I think for, I would say, transaction banking services teams within banks, I think as of today, outside of the United States, maybe, most of the other countries, especially in Asia, they are much more conservative. Now, for payments companies, it's a little bit different, right? As this as well as anybody, and definitely better than I do, but a lot of payments companies, they have their licenses at stake, but there's also third parties that they can leverage, right? So in a very, I wouldn't say exactly turnkey solution, but I would say relatively convenient way, they can leverage third parties to kind of start getting into this field, right? And as long as they have the corridors, as long as they have the partners across the different jurisdictions, within a few weeks, months, they can actually get up and running. So I think it's just that depending on the different types of business, depending on the region they're working with, and specifically what type of payments they're doing, I think that will really define how fast they can kind of upstart.
Gotcha. Bring it back to maybe some real world use cases, especially with you being based out here in APAC in this part of the world. What are some really interesting use cases that you've then seen that have really kind of taken off, aside from Reap, of course?
Absolutely. I think for us, it's at the end of the day, I think trading is still definitely a big part of our space. But on the payment side, on the tokenization side, we're definitely seeing a dramatic uplift. So for payments, for example, I think it was about 2 weeks ago that was announced within Haneda Airport. You can now use stablecoins on Solana to do payments within a certain set of merchants. So this is a pilot that is being run. So that's, for example, is a real life use case, right? Obviously, if that goes well, we would love to replicate that with the teams involved across many jurisdictions, many other airports. So that's one example on the payment side. On the other side is we also see a lot of local-based stablecoins coming online. I think that is no surprise to everyone or anyone. We're very, very excited about that. I think being consensus this week, definitely hear a lot of chatters about that as well. So we're looking forward to kind of the different, especially the large GDP countries issuing their local-based stablecoins. I think that'll be quite a meaningful step forward.
Sorry to interrupt, but I want to tell you about our smart contract lead sponsor, Circle.
What is Circle?
At Circle, we're building a digital dollar that brings the power of the internet to money.
Circle's the place where crypto meets stability,
where local businesses meet global customers,
and the US dollar meets USDC.
Meet Circle.
Thank you to all of our sponsors and community partners. Now back to the conversation.
That's a really good example and kind of segues very nicely into the next topic, which is that last mile of getting funds, specifically in the payment side, into the end recipient's bank account, wallets, whatever it might be. You mentioned, paying at Haneda Airport, and Solana can settle transactions in less than a second. And we always talk about stablecoins and blockchain technology as kind of the highway layer, but that last mile sometimes still have to ride on local rails. What are some of the latest innovation that you guys are working on to kind of bypass that legacy banking delays such that the end recipient can get funds almost immediately?
Yeah, I think, the ideal goal in the long run, I think, is that people just hold the stablecoins, right? And then that is truly what the instant is. So there's no really off-ramping, but people just hold it. And again, tying it back to internet capital markets, that's kind of our vision, right? Which is we believe that money and assets should be existing in one ecosystem, and that's how the network effect is actually created. We don't believe in a chain that's specifically for payments or a chain specifically for vertical or RWA chain or something like that, because I think that would really dampen the network effect of money and assets. So in that environment, right, in that hopefully not too distant future, you can see businesses, big or small, being able to manage their working capital, manage their treasuries in a way running on stablecoins, and then be able to flex into money market funds from BlackRock or Franklin Templeton. And then when it's not, when they need the actual capital to be dispersed, they'll pull it out and move it at the speed of light. That would be a fantastic vision. I hope you agree.
No, I think we share this vision a lot, and I talk about it a lot on panels and speaking events and things like that, which is I believe in this closed loop ecosystem where each counterparty that you have to pay subsequently is also able to essentially ingest and accept stablecoin or some kind of digital asset such that they can keep passing it down the chain.
Yeah.
How do you keep getting the next player in that chain to become more accepting of that digital asset, right? So let's go back to the airport example again. Airports are pretty large enterprises, I would say. Are you trying to convince them to say, hey, look, just take stablecoins? Or are you still off-ramping today and then hoping they'll get there eventually? Like, what does that look like today?
Yeah, they're definitely off-ramping. I think at this point, the merchants still are much more comfortable in fiat. And right now, how the flow works is it abstracts away all the stablecoin flows. So basically, the merchant side is alternative payments, QR code, but at the end of the day, they still receive in JPY. And I think how we see this is the challenge that I think I face quite a bit as well. But I also think this is the opportunity, which is within that specific use case we just talked about, there are probably 4 different stakeholders and players, maybe 5 including the regulators. So a lot of what I do, and I think a lot of people at the foundation as a whole, is to do the education, is to be that glue. We try to have a broad picture of exactly how the whole flow works, who are the key stakeholders within this particular flow, and it's our job to kind of face off and kind of engage with them, to kind of educate them. For example, show them best practices that we've seen overseas in the US or that we've seen in Latin America. Number 2, also introduce them to trusted partners. So I think there's a lot of time a technology gap or a process gap. I would never say that I have all the answers, but we have a very robust ecosystem that we can tap into, right? People like you, career payments, finance individual, can actually do. I think you guys have such a strong background, and some of the content that your team has produced, I think, has obviously elevated and educated a lot of the people in the Solana ecosystem.
No, thank you for that. I think we're all trying to fight the same fight because of the shared vision here. I think for the bigger players in that downstream of that chain that I was talking about, as you get to more enterprise, bigger businesses, you're talking to like high-level CFOs. Treasury is always something top of mind for them. Like, once I get this in stablecoins, what can I do with it? In the education piece that you talked about, what are you specifically saying to some of these bigger players in terms of benefits of receiving stablecoins? Like, what are the talking points that you use to win them over to build an internal stablecoin treasury?
Yeah, you're accessing my secret sauce here, sir. So. No, but joking aside,
everyone wants to hear.
In a very large organization, the complexity is every person has a different set of incentives and roles and responsibilities. The CFO potentially cares about the security of the assets, the returns, how is it compared to existing treasury management tool that they have in the Web2 world, right? So that's one. For somebody to actually leverage stablecoins as treasury, you also need to, again, go through the IT security side. So that set of individuals is a completely different conversation that we're having. And a lot of times we bring our technical experts as well, right? And then number 3 is working with potentially the CEO or the CRO to understand their long-term vision, right? And is there multiple use cases, not just treasury itself, but I think if you can see that a large business, the CEO, CRO, or chief strategy officer, for example, they actually really believe in this technology, it's a much easier conversation to say, hey, we've done this before, we've worked with X, Y, and Z. Here's kind of how they thought through it. And if the vision kind of aligns, that's kind of, I think, where the magic happens, right? Because we think in long term. We work with partners, especially people who have shared vision within the space. Our goal is to kind of help them not just for one project, but across multiple projects.
I have in my notes here agentic payments and agentic treasury movements, which is sort of, I think, what we've been trying to educate people on is that if this works for you in terms of accepting a more programmable digital payment currency, a lot of things can be then optimized. And hopefully that can incentivize people to sort of move towards this on-chain world where everything flows through digital currency instead. Solana obviously works across the entire world. So maybe just extrapolating a little bit and not looking just at APAC, do you see a difference in kind of driving that last mile adoption between a place like a Hong Kong, Singapore versus, let's say, Latin America or the rest of Southeast Asia?
I would say it's still relatively difficult. I don't think it's super easy right now. I still think, actually, I would love to ask you that question later. But from what we see, we still feel like there is a still lack of education in terms of how that last mile can be solved, number one. Number two, you also see the regulations across those jurisdictions are still uncertain. So I think a lot of it is on the banks themselves or on the payment companies themselves to make certain decisions, right? They may have all the toolings that's available, right, from AML, KYT, KYC, but there's still a lot of, I would say, internal, I would say, art to it versus science. And then I think the last thing is, I think everyone's still looking at the US, right? As long as the US regulations really solidifies, then I think the rest of the world feels much more comfortable in terms of doing more, right? And I think a lot of businesses themselves would be open to doing more in this space.
Maybe bring it back to Hong Kong specifically and how Hong Kong is really trying to build this tokenized financial hub, specifically for a 2030 outlook that they've published very recently. What do you think that looks like for Solana specifically in this part of the region? Like, what are you guys thinking about building within Hong Kong specifically and looking in APAC?
There's a couple of things. I think for us in Hong Kong, it is really payments and assets. I mean, that's really what the strength of Hong Kong is, right? And so the flow of capital, right, and the flow of assets. So from the Hong Kong, the regulator side, I think they've done a really great job of pushing out different projects like Project Ensemble as of late. Obviously, Hong Kong dollar stablecoin licenses, the pending licenses. I think across of those, we would love to partner with anybody and all participants, right, to help educate them on different technologies, different use cases that we are already deployed overseas. And I think there's also a partnership and network effect that we're hoping to build. I think that even if you are able to collaborate with all the Hong Kong financial institutions, the business of blockchain and stablecoin, it's a global business. So they still need to also find counterparties overseas, right? They need to find counterparties in Singapore, Japan, Korea, Latin America, the Middle East. And I think that's actually where Solana really shines because we have this global presence and we have very strong partners across all these different regions, across different verticals. We often partner, make introductions, and build tools together.
And do you think that vision that we just talked about, where there is no longer this line between traditional finance and kind of Web3 finance, internet capital markets, is going to be gone by 2030? Like, do you think it's faster than that, later than that? Where do you think we'll be in about 5 years' time?
I think it will probably take more than 5 years. And a lot of it is just, I think it's just the regulatory and the compliance side, right? I think the technology is there, but I think when it comes to assets, money, it is quite prudent to kind of take your time and make sure things are moving in a safe manner, right? And I think that's, especially in Asia, I think a lot of as I mentioned before, I mean, this is, I think, pretty common knowledge, but a lot of the regulators are quite conservative, much more conservative. I won't say much more, but definitely more conservative than the US side. And I think that will continue to be the trend.
So in this world where there's like leaders and laggers when it comes to regulation, where I think US might be a leader, what has to change for other financial markets or key cities like Hong Kong or Singapore to kind of take a lead there? Like what has to change?
I think it's like a clear business opportunity, right? I think that would help, right? Number one is the business case. Number two is, can you achieve those business outcomes in a safe and compliant manner, right? And then number three is, well, once the regulatory side feels cleared and the business case is there, can the technology actually support those use cases? I think if you can answer kind of those three questions, I definitely feel that countries who are like Hong Kong, Singapore, would be able to move faster. I mean, we definitely feel that there's tremendous demand within these institutions, but I think having those three variables at this all three of those variables having been solved, I think that will really accelerate the progress.
And maybe just to bring all of this to a close here, you've been here at Consensus. Solana has had a huge presence. What are some of your biggest takeaways from the outcomes of this week? And has any of your thinking changed, based on the last couple of days?
It's been great. Being in Consensus and having our own event called Accelerate alongside Consensus was an amazing experience. I walked the halls quite a bit yesterday. I'm going back later today. And I just definitely still feel the energy from the builders, from the institutions, and from just users of the products, right? I think we have come such a long way as an industry. Just like 4 years ago, I would say the profile of the people at Consensus was much more different, right? And it shows to the maturation process of our industry. And again, kind of tying it all with our vision of internet capital markets, we truly believe that in that future, you have to have payment companies, financial institutions, retail users, product users, developers, students, all participate, all stakeholders within that ecosystem for it to be successful. So, and I think that Consensus is just a very, very good example of the future that we're trying to build.
I love this theme of convergence that we've had throughout this conversation that we had. Bringing it all the way back to the beginning, talking about our backgrounds in TradFi and then going to Web3. I think when that happens, people bring a lot of the experiences, a lot of the structure, a lot of the thought processes from TradFi into Web3 and hopefully make it a more, palatable environment for regulators, for users, for the ecosystem.
Yeah.
And I think the more that we can do that, the more we can have this convergence, the more quickly we can get to that world where there is no longer a line between this TradFi and Web3 world because everybody's just cross-pollinating. Thank you so much for taking time today to chat with me. Insightful conversation and really enjoyed your answers. Very, very insightful for our listeners, I'm sure. Thank you for tuning in to Web3 Harbour Smart Contact series, and we'll see you next time.